So let me get some things.
Well, I'm a lawyer and I obviously can't stay around for this as well as I have a kitchen to remodel. So I think I've got to drop out because, it'd just be a conflict of interest.
I understand. Let's see. Come
All right,
on.
for everybody else, let's go ahead and hit mute, and I'm going to do the same so that we give Mike no background noise.
Yep. Yep. So ham operators, the good old code of ethics. And this is stuff that I'm not making up. This is real live stuff out there. So going to go through a little brief introduction here and get you kind of on the right page so you understand a little bit about what I'm talking about. We all know that good old Solar Cycle 25 has been has been paying some really big dividends on DXing. DXing has really been hot and heavy. And now it hasn't been so nice on us for contesting. We know that solar cycles, depending on its level of activity, it can yield a lot of good stuff. It can also yield some bad stuff. So what we've kind of experienced is on some of the contests, usually a couple of days before a contest, we have a big CME and it screws everything up for the contest. But just for overall DXing, it's been pretty insane out there. So one of the telltale things that we haven't seen before, Monday, on a Monday, June 12th, 2023, so that's a month or so back, was one of the best ever openings on 6 meters and VHF. Now, we usually consider on 6 meters a big opening to be able to talk across the country on 6 meters. This opening was so good that we were able to talk into Europe from the Pacific Northwest and all the way down through South America. It also turned around and we were able to get part of Asia. You just never get an opening on 6 meters like that. So all the 6 meter junkies, and I have to say that I'm becoming a little bit of a 6 meter junkie, although I missed this one day opening, that this was an absolute insane, once in a lifetime event that happened on June 12th. So we know, generally speaking, 20 meters has been open almost all night long. So 20 meters has been very active. It also depends on the level of activities. Now on 40 meters, can you imagine someone calling you from India? They hear you talking to other people that's in the Arabian Peninsula, and then some guy in India gives you a call and wants to make a contact. So that happened to me a couple of weeks back. But Pakistan was in there, Southeast Asia, the Arabian Peninsula. I mean, we normally don't get much activity out of the Arabian Peninsula, but I was doing very, very good in that area. 15 meters. It's been a little bit more flaky. It hasn't been a bread and butter, but when things get set just right, 50 meters has been open everywhere in the world. It's a daylight band, so it's just open during the daylight hours. I've seen stuff go into like 10 o'clock before a couple nights on 15 meters, but generally that hasn't been happening. And of course, we've been having some 10 meters openings out there too. That's been okay, not great, but okay. So don't expect propagation to be this good all the time. As we know, when the sun gets really active, like it is now, we can have some really, really high highs and we can have some really, really bad lows because of CMEs. And also when the sun gets super, super active, it ends up screwing up the D layer. We get D layer absorption, and that will start shutting things down on 40, 20, and 15 meters. And so that can end up causing problems when the sun gets too active on here. Okay, so we know we've had some really good expeditions and some other ones coming up. Rwanda was a cool one out there. Beauvais, We know that that could have been a much better one than what was, but we had an awful lot of people kind of scuttling what was going on, and we'll be talking about in more detail. Sable Island, that was a piece of cake. I backed into those guys by accident and was able to get them on, I think, about a couple bands. Spratly Island, couple bands on that. Congo, I think 3 bands. Easter Island, I backed in that one by accident. And was able to make a couple of contacts on a couple of different bands. Lancashire Island, that one there, I was able to get on one band. And Ducey Island, remember was talking about RIB, that's a remote in a box, where some of these islands, they just don't want you to set foot on it. But we're getting some traction there to be able to take this box, complete, transmitter, receiver, that's just a flex radio, and an amplifier, all the solar panels, the converters for it, and a network interface that basically connects back to a boat that's a couple miles offshore. And so by doing this, you don't, you put basically someone comes on shore, fills up the generators for the day, checks to make sure everything's operational, make sure the antennas are properly tensioned and stuff, and then they can get off. They don't end up disturbing the wildlife all day long with people on shore. You don't have to haul food over there. You don't have to haul all the waste back off of it. It's just a box you haul over the island, set it up, put up some antennas, run some cables, and you disappear. And this is getting some really good traction. And it's a whole nother discussion that we'll get a little later on. Okay, radio sport. We all know that we've had CQ Worldwide that just happened. WPX just happened. ARDX contest just happened. We have Islands on the Air, all Asia, worked all Europe. We did the 7QP stuff and the ARL Field Day. So there's lots of contesting that goes on, and there's a set of conduct that's expected out of a ham radio operator. So let's talk about why we have this code of conduct. So just imagine in this world, we have a world where every car driver decides to ignore traffic laws and cast aside common courtesies. So just imagine for an instant what that looks like. So that means passing on the right-hand side of a vehicle, bumping a subcompact into a guardrail. Yeah, just for grins. I like to be able to do. What I'd really like to do is to have a vehicle where I could cut off a Porsche that's driving down the Autobahn. Or you can make your own decisions about, stopping at a signal or running a red light. So if we didn't have laws and people didn't obey those laws, what would we end up? We would have chaos, strict, pure chaos. This operating vehicles just would not work. So we have this code of conduct that helps us in the world of amateur radio to make sure that everybody has an enjoyable event operating ham radio. So let's apply this to DX pile up and contest. So this whole program would have been better. I had it all produced and everything before 7QP, but there just wasn't any time to get this worked into our all of our other things that we talked about as far as training stuff. So this, hopefully it'll be good information on things you probably saw and experienced, and help provide you some guidance as we continue down the road in the future. So without everyone's cooperation of the operating principles that we have in ham radio, DXing and contest would be equivalent to on the air road rage. It would be a free-for-all. Everybody would be out for their own in trying to make contacts. We saw this in Beauvais. We had too many people that were just out for themselves, not waiting their turn, tuning up, jamming, trying to get contacts over everybody else, not waiting their turn. And just, it was plain old air road rage out there. Just terrible. And this is some other things that we've seen in other contests. So as members of the amateur radio community, we should strive to make our ham radio experience as positive as possible for everyone involved. We want to be examples, and I'm going to be giving you some guidelines on how we should conduct ourselves and the example that we should present out there when we're trying to do contesting and DXing, and we'll show the results of when we're following these proper protocol, proper ways of doing things, what kind of dividends we can expect from that. So contesters code of conduct or ethics. I will, and understand, I'm not making this stuff up. If you go out there and Google amateur radio code of conduct or ethics and stuff like that, you'll find the same set bullet list out there that I'm presenting right here. So it's nothing new. I'm just explaining what these rules really mean and how they get applied. I will learn and obey the rules of any contest I enter, including the rules of my entire category. Now understand, this is in contest. So every contest has a strategy on what you're trying to achieve. There is a general overall set of rules and a set of rules on what you're trying to achieve. Also for each category, and the category can be like QRP, standard power, max power, different, if you're running a generator, if you're running solar. So there's all these subcategories. So first thing you want to do when you get into a contest, you read the rules, you understand the rules, so you can obey by the rules. I will obey the rules of amateur radio in my country. So if you're working on an international contest like CQ Worldwide or WPX, you also have to obey the rules of the contest. You also have to obey the rules in your country. So just because the guys over here in the States are able to run 1500 watts and you're in New Zealand where you can only run 400 watts, you still have to abide by the rules of your country. You can only run 400 watts and you have to deal with putting up and competing with the guys in the US that can run full 1500 watts. I will not modify my log after the contest by using additional data sources to correct call signs and exchange errors. So what the hell does this mean? Okay, when you're in a contest, what are you trying to prove there? What is for me as an individual, what am I trying to prove? I'm trying to take, and for each call sign that I hear, I need to record it accurately. For the exchange, I need to record it accurately. So I'm being graded on my ability to ferret out and to understand what that call sign is and what that exchange is, and use my fingers to properly enter that information into my logging system. So that's what I'm being graded on. If I'm using, and that's at the moment, at that moment when I'm doing the contact and entering that information, that's what I'm being graded on. I'm not being graded on after the contest using other sources, other abilities to take and filter my log, find errors, correct them, and then I submit that log. That is, in this context, cheating. You don't use other programs to fix problems that you entered. If you entered the information incorrectly, you have to face the consequences of it. That's what makes a better operator. It's really important to have good ears to translate that call sign or hear that call sign, record it, and to get that information on the exchange and get that recorded. That is what you are being graded on. Okay, I will accept the judging and scoring decisions of the contest sponsors as final. So there can be little issues that go on and stuff like that. Someone maybe their PC wasn't working and the log information didn't show up that you need to update a log entry, and usually they're pretty good about that. But as far as going through there and contesting how things were scored, how things were added up, you do not go after the contest sponsor. You do not fight with them. You have to learn to accept their scoring as being final. It's okay to bring it up to them, but it's not okay for you to take and battle with them. I will yield my frequency anytime emergency communications is active. Communications activity. So what this is just common sense. We all know that anytime someone comes on the air, no matter when, where, or what, if they declare emergency, they get that frequency, period. We are not there to debate it with them about the level of emergency, about any other details about the emergency. We just give them that frequency and we move on to some other spot on the band. I will operate my transmitter with sufficient signal quality to minimize interference to others. In contest, one of the things that bugs the heck out of me is that, they take that compression level, trying to get, all this information crammed in our little tiny 2.7 megahertz or kilohertz bandwidth for voice. You're trying to cram all this little information in there, and they take that darn compression level and they take that dial, and normally it stops at 10, but they turn it all the way up to 12, where you have so much compression, you can't understand what they're saying. You have all kinds of splatter. We know that if you drive transmitters too hard, or excuse me, if you drive amplifiers too hard, they'll end up splattering. You just don't do that. You make sure that your equipment is working correctly. You don't drive it outside of the normal specified range. You may end up going through there and dropping some of the lows out and pushing some of the highs up, but you don't take and push it to the point where you're causing spectrum problems for other people out there. I will adhere to the DX code of conduct in my operating style. So what I've been going through here was for contesters. So if you're doing DXing, there's yet some more things to consider here, and that's what we're going to move into. So it's like all of this code, contesting code of conduct also applies for doing DXing. So let's look at DXing, what that means. So when you come onto a frequency and you start listening around, that's either you're looking for a place to call CQ, or you're looking for a place that you are trying to make a contact with the person out there. So the first thing is I will listen. The second thing you do, I'll listen some more. And the third thing you do is that you'll listen even more. So you'll listen before you call. That means either dropping your call sign out there for someone calling CQ, or to take and start calling. Typically what you do is that when you listen, don't hear anything, you always ask, is this frequency in use? You don't just ask once, you ask at least twice before you assume that that's a clear frequency for you to get in there and start talking. So that gets into listening. The second thing, if you're listening to a station that is calling CQ, before you come back to him, you need to make damn good and sure you understand his call sign, and you also watch very carefully to see how he does the exchange. You want to be able to make sure you blend in with the person calling CQ. You don't want to disrupt his rhythm. He has a rhythm that he will settle into, that person calling CQ. He'll settle into a rhythm that you need to match up with. That is his most effective rhythm that he believes he has there to be able to consistently get QSOs turned entered into his log, and move on to the next thing. That person calling CQ, he wants to move through things as fast as possible, and he will end up tailoring his rhythm for calling CQs. So that's why you listen before you end up dropping into the queue there to try and do the exchange. I will only call if I can copy the DX stations properly. So here's an example. Everybody knows what a DX cluster is. So good old, I think, Spratly Island. Someone dropped in Spratly Island on this frequency. And it's like, next thing you know, you start listening to that frequency, and all these guys are given their call sign, assuming there's someone out there to listen to. Well, unfortunately, where you are in that world makes a big difference. If you're not hearing that person calling CQ, you have no business in throwing out your call sign expecting someone to listen to it if you can't get a receipt or the exchange to end up logging that call sign. It makes no sense. All you're doing is jamming up the airwave and causing a bunch of noise and static. So that's what it means. I will only call if I can copy the DX station properly. That even if the guy's way down on the noise, if you can't really make the guy out, you can't do the exchange. So why in the heck are you even calling? You just don't call. You wait till the conditions change. I will not trust a DX cluster and will be sure of the DX station's call sign before calling. So I think all of us has been bit that have used a DX cluster. We click on that ends up our station there on the cluster. It sets our receiver to the right frequency. It takes and drops the guy's call sign into the first window of our logging program. So all we have to do is just copy the exchange. So I'm sure everybody has had an experience where the guy calls CQ or gives his call sign or something like that, and that's not what the DX cluster was. You know, it may be like a W7 and the guy's really a W6. You don't trust the dang cluster. You always verify and hear the guy's call sign to see if it matches what's in the cluster before you proceed to do dropping your own call sign in there to close the transaction. I'll say for me, I probably experienced almost a 10% error rate listening to or using what's in the cluster. Cluster will get me to someone that's calling there. It may or may not validate, be the proper call sign, but it does provide a useful tool. But I never trust a cluster to give me the right call sign because I've experienced about a 10% error rate. I will not interfere with the DX station nor anyone calling, and will never tune up on a DX frequency or in a QSX slot. So what does that mean? So these guys out there sometimes will just be giving their call sign, just throwing their call sign out there constantly, and just talking over everybody else going on. So you need to wait for the right time when the guy says QSL or Q or Z to know that that's the time to end up going out and dropping your call sign in there. The other part is that you never tune up your transceiver on top of an active station calling. Now, and I don't know if everybody understands what QSX means. If you're working split, so in other words, the guy is calling CQ on one frequency, but answering stations maybe up 5 or up 5 to 10 or up 7 or something like that, but at a different frequency, it reduces the interference that that the stations you're trying to connect with. It reduces the interference by a huge amount and actually allows you to get a much higher run rate when you're calling CQ. So you never tune up on the guy's calling frequency. You never go and tune up on the responding frequencies, the ones that are up on the split. You just never do that. All that is QRM, and that's just plain wrong. Okay. I will wait for the DX station to end a contact before I call. So you will hear some guy calling Q or Z, or he'll give another CQ, or he'll do something. And that's what you get in the first part. When you listen, you know what his handoff is when he's going to call. And so you always wait for the DX station to end a contact before you call. You don't try calling while he's in the middle of trying to do the exchange. Just never do that. All it does is screw things up for everybody else out there. I will always send my full call sign. So what I keep seeing these days is that guys will only give the last 3 characters of their call sign, last 2 or 3 characters. They never give the whole thing. For me, calling CQ, it is really important for me to hear the whole call sign so I can get it in the log. By giving a partial, that means I have another exchange I have to go through, another transmit receive exchange. That slows me down. That costs me valuable time, and that hurts me on my runway. So I want everybody out there to only give their complete call sign and not take and shortcut it. I will call and then listen for a response with a reasonable interval. I will not call continuously. And this gets back to guys out there these days. They just set their call continuously, no matter if people are doing exchanges and stuff in the middle of all of this. You just don't do that. When the calling station gives his call, you know when he ends at that time, then you respond with your call sign. You just don't do it continuously. I will not transmit when the DX operator calls another call sign. I keep seeing guys calling over top of each other. That's kind of the same stuff I've been talking about in the previous couple points. I will not transmit when the DX station queries a call sign not like mine. And I keep seeing that like that. Like, the guy will say, there's a W7 coming in, W7. Some guy in 6 land, some guy in some guy in some other country responds, and it's not in context. That guy is, the more times that people interfere with things, the more retries it takes, the further backlogged that person calling CQ is going to get. So another good one that I keep seeing, I will not transmit when the DX station requests geographical areas other than mine. Very, very common, where the expedition is saying only working in Europe. Notice that for a chunk of time, he'll strictly work European station. And then you have a half a dozen idiots from the US out there trying to take a wedge in there, and the guys will never end up getting a response back. You need to respect the guys calling the CQ on the expedition. They're the ones that are in control of it, and you have to respect them. And this goes on also like for geographical areas. I'm only looking for seven areas, and so he'll work all the 7 areas. Guys will only work in 6s, and so he's very consistent on how he works through the different call areas within the U.S. So don't take and
Hey,
drop
Mike.
your call sign in. Yeah.
I have a question, and of course, I'm not a 7 in the 7 area. How should I act accordingly on this?
By your call sign number. In other words, if you're a 0,
Wait for 0.
wait for 0.
Okay, that's what I do. I was just wondering.
So if you want to join the rest of the crowd, you join the call sign that where you're geographically located.
Right, yeah, you can't prove otherwise that you live in 7 land when you're a different prefix.
Yep.
Unless somebody's sitting there looking you up, right? So, yeah, okay, that's what I do.
I will, this is really important. I will be thankful if and when I do make a contact. It is so important. Like for the Beauvais, guys complain, about take 3-4 hours to take and work through a pileup and finally get a validation. And people bitch and moan and complain about it. That's not the way to do it. That's just the way what it took to get through that pileup because of other jerks in there screwing things up. But be appreciative, be thankful that you've made the contact and appreciate the fact that you got the person in the log. Don't take and complain about it. The bottom one, really important. I will respect my fellow hams and to conduct myself as I earn their respect. So me, I want people to respect. I may not be the guy out there chewing through a bazillion contacts and stepping all over everybody and getting confirmations and all the stuff like that, but I want people to respect me for my style and the way that I conduct myself on the air. That's really important. Okay, so let's wrap things up. Here's kind of some food for thought. So let's say an operator is knocking down about 150 contacts per hour. That's pretty easy to do. That's 24 seconds per contact. Pretty easy to do. When hams don't follow the rules and they're taking things they're calling over top of other people, they're interrupting, people are trying to figure out some QRP rig and you got some QRO rig talking over them. That only ends up screwing up things. So rather than making quick contacts that only take 24 seconds, now what your contact rate drops to is maybe, let's say, around 60 seconds, which is terrible. But if you have a bunch of guys out there screwing things up for you, that can happen. So what happens when that contact rate slows down, the pileup happens. That's when things get backed up. That's the old, thing like the sewer drain getting backed up because the old orifice of where affluent stuff has to flow through isn't as big as what it needs to be. If everybody's doing their right job, things should be going through there really fast. So a really great operator can easily make about 20,000 contacts in a DXpedition. That's a week-long event there. 20,000 contacts. That's pretty great, pretty big. If other hams showed respect and followed the rules, likely that number could move to 30,000 contacts. That means 10,000 more people could have got confirmation that got cheated out of jerks out there trying to get to the head of the list before everybody else worked through it patiently. Food for thought. So anyway, that's it, folks. So any questions or anything?
Mike, this was a great topic that, it's funny because we all think that, radio is technical, but this is about just being a gentleman or a lady. And I think it's a very important thing to bring up. And so thank you very much for throwing a stick in our spokes.
Yeah, well, it's also, you think about this and then you can realize how, Italians are horrible out there, followed by Spanish. And these are all very, very aggressive people. And I keep going back to the adage where, if you have one just mediocre driver driving down the street, hitting the stoplights, going through the stoplights, or going, when the signals change and stuff like that, as opposed to another guy racing through the traffic at the end of the day, they're both at the same point. And I saw this on, I just got home from 2 weeks over in Idaho. And I just saw this on this one stretch there. There were like 3 guys that were just always running around to other people, doing all kinds of other stuff, and really being kind of ugly drivers. And at the end of the day, 4 hours later, we were both at the end of at the same stoplight, that from 200 miles worth of driving. So trying to be faster, trying to be on top of things, trying to run faster than anybody else, it doesn't get you anywhere. And besides, this is not a hobby that I should end up having to take and worry about taking blood pressure medicine for.
I have a question, Mike.
Sure.
In one of your early slides, it talked about armature radio, and I was curious what that was.
Oh, amateur radio. Typo. Sorry about that.
See, I do read that stuff.
Thank you. I need to do the same thing.
So Steve, just so you know, that's armchair for you. When you can sit back with your boom mic, it's armchair radio. There's a difference.
Okay.
That's when you can use 8 kilohertz of bandwidth, to really stretch that audio so that many people can hear you. That's armchair. Okay. No, very good, Mike. Mike, this was really great. It validated what I already do, and I'm going to take a note to be better at 1 or 2 things. So thank you.
And I think it's a good review. It's something that maybe helps every once in a while to review this and cause you to think, and then also recognize some of the things that go on out there. But it's a good review.
Excellent. Any other questions for Mike, or should we go into the business section?
One more quick question, Mike.
Sure.
Your comment about cheating in the log.
Yeah.
I have in the past, and I admit it, where I didn't put in a call sign correct, or there is no call related to that call sign. So I've removed it from my log.
Mm-hmm.
Was that cheating?
No.
Okay.
No, it's trying to correct things to improve your score. You're really, if you knew something was incorrect, then you don't want the darn thing to be in the log. But if you, after the contest, after, okay, my comment was, in the context was, what I want to be graded on is how well I heard that call sign, how that got translated to my fingers in typing it into the logging program, how well I heard the exchange and typed that into the logging program. What I'm being graded on is that process. And that's what I believe needs to be as pure as possible and not contaminated with anything else.
Okay.
So also, Ted, along that same line is that, I used to do stuff where I would go through there, and there's plenty of software out there to screen programs and clean up logs. Lots of really cool stuff. Find broken call signs, find call signs that don't really exist. And but it'll really spiff up your log, and when you present it, it looks much better. I mean, it'll shave another 5% or something off the score, as far as stuff in there. And I used to use that, and then it wasn't until I started looking at this code of conduct and started thinking about that, and realized that no, that's not what I'm being graded on. What I'm being graded on is how well my ears work. And you understand that, when you get into the contest, I like doing a couple pre-contests to learn and train my ears. My ears over time, if I'm not using it and listening to call signs and translating what I'm hearing out of call signs, they get fatigued or they lose their ability to understand or how to translate that call sign. As it's just like, CW is like a lot of different things that we do. If we don't keep practicing that and keep using it, we lose that capability. So when you get into major contests, I really like going through a couple pre-contests to end up retraining my ears on what to listen to. Anything else, our folks?
Excellent discussion.
Okay.
I think we should, put this into practice, and we all know where we could improve. And so it's up to us to become better operators so that we can be better examples. So no need for confessions here. Okay. But Ted, you are absolutely in the right. When you remove something from the log, you are not trying to correct something that you thought you got right after the fact and taking credit for something that you misheard. So you are absolutely in the right what you did. And it's just to be clear, like what Mike said. Okay.